I'm Xanderwood. I make indie games and tutorials on game development. I also play your indie games every week on my channel. Make sure you subscribe and click that bell icon so you never miss a video.
And as always, a massive thank you and a shout out to my wonderful Patreon and channel members: Jet Simon, Enmark Games, Foozle CC, Rob, Lightning Cat, Basic Tarazan, Olivia Bernier, Tor Alexanderson, Matt, Fanban, Amari Lewis, Seth Goble, Retro Galaxy, and Jared Demon. Hello guys, welcome back to the penultimate episode of Let's Remake Castlevania in Construct 3. In this episode, we need to assign the boss bat's health to the enemy health bar that we have created in the HUD in a previous episode. So let's start by giving the boss an instance variable that will control just that. So add a new instance variable. We're going to just call this one boss HP, and it's going to be a number. You can leave it at 0 for the time being. Let's go back to our layout 1 event sheet, which is the player events, wherever we have all of our global variables. See our player HP there, right? Okay. Let's see, how big is this bar? 48 pixels. So let's double click in. It's 1, 2, 3. So if we make it divisible by 3, every time we lose 1, we'll lose exactly one of these little bars here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16 times 3. Somebody do the maths. So let's go over to the boss HP and give it 48. Therefore, we know if we subtract 3 every time we score a hit on the boss, we're going to lose exactly one of these little bars. So let's now right click and create another group in the boss events. I'm going to call this one boss damage. Now add an event. Now, did we put the weapons in their own group? We did. So let's go ahead and add an event that says weapons. So any of these weapons in this group on collision with another object, and that object is going to be boss. Any of these weapons on collision with another another object boss sub event, we're going to trigger it once so we don't accidentally trigger it multiple times. We're going to add an action and we're going to go boss, and we're going to subtract from that instance variable boss HP 3. Now let's try that out. Actually, it's not going to work because we need to assign those variables to this sprite. We can do that in the every tick up here in the boss events. So let's add an action to the every tick, and let's find that boss HP bar. Enemy HP. We're going to now set the width to the boss dot, what did we call it? Boss HP. So that instance variable on the actual boss sprite that we just created. So we're going to set the width of the enemy HP. Let's just make sure that is called enemy HP. It is, yep. So every tick now, that is going to be set to the width of this thing. So you can see it hasn't changed, which is good. Oh. Be useful if I could hit it. No. So we've now taken out the whole thing. It's because we need to destroy the weapon, because it didn't destroy it, kept on going through it. So whatever weapon it is, we'll destroy it. And now we've taken out all of the HP. Ah, I know why. Because the boss is in the enemies group, and I believe we've got an event set up that says if the weapon, any of the weapons hit any of the enemies, then destroy the enemy. Killing enemies. Yeah, here you go. Any of the enemies on collision with a weapon, destroy the enemies. We need that to be true for every single enemy except for the boss. Instead of saying enemies destroy, let's give all of our enemies the HP variable, the health variable, and this is going to be a slicker way of doing it. So you remember how we clicked on the enemy before and we gave it a boss HP? I don't want that anymore. We're going to click on the enemies group and we're going to assign it a family instance variable, and that family instance variable is just going to be HP. The number is going to be 3 because that's going to be defaulted across all of the enemies. Now the only thing I'm going to change is the boss's HP here. You can see it's inherited over here on the left, inherited from enemies. This one we're going to change to 48. Then when we go back to enemies, we can say enemies on collision with weapons. Instead of enemies destroy, we can say enemies, and we can subtract from that variable, that family variable HP, we can subtract 3, which means that any enemy with 3 HP, which will be all of them, they're going to die because they'll have 0 HP, and the boss will simply just lose 3. So let's go back here and say every tick. So instead of putting that now to boss HP, we're going to link it up to HP, which is the family variable instead. Now we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that because we have all of that now still programmed in here, just in that same block. The only thing we do need to do in the killing enemies tab now is destroy the enemies if their HP is 0 or less. So we're going to go enemies. Now we're going to compare that HP number, and we're going to say if it's less than or equal to 0, then we're going to destroy the enemies. Enemies, destroy. There, now that should be all taken care of. There we go. So you can see we can take him out damage wise. Although the whip's not hurting him, so we need to program in that whip. Let's go back now and make sure, if we go to the player events, we need the hit trigger here on collision with enemies. Where did I put that line? Ah, here we go. Enemies on collision with a hit trigger. Enemies destroy. That means I should be able to destroy the boss with 1 whip. Let me just check. I can't. So something... Enemies on collision with hit trigger. Instead of saying enemies destroy there, let's just subtract 3 from the HP. Yeah, that is in the enemies tab, which means it will be relevant. Let's go ahead and drag that out of the ghoul one and put it down in the killing enemies. It's not spawning in because, like with the player, we need an instance variable, an instance of it on the layout. So go into the properties or the project groups here, and we get the hit trigger. We'll just drag it out. Now it will be relevant. Although it's still not, it's not registering. The whip, the whip's not whipping. Okay, well the bounding box needs to be set to the whole shape. It's just not spawning in that hitbox because I've got it set to initially visible true. So I drag it in there, you can see it. And it's supposed to spawn in when we attack. Let's find it. What's it called? A hit trigger. It's a function. Hit spawner. That's why, because it's in a function over here. So we need to include the functions event sheet. Now it will work just fine. He says, but let's see. No, that is very, very odd. I've set to initially visible true. Let's have a look at the function. Let's see, hitbox spawner. Spawn hit trigger. See, now this is the problem. Look, it's saying spawn it on the player layer. So we don't have a player layer in our second layout, and that's why it's not working. So let's just change it to the objects layer, because we have an objects, not objector. We have an objects layer in both of our layouts. Object again? What's wrong with my typing? Objects. So we have an objects layer here, and if we go back to layout 1, we also have an objects layer in layout 1, so it's not going to matter. Now, although it's still not showing up. But I can still whip it. Okay. And now the whip is very powerful. It's because it's triggering it more than once. We can go back and set that initially visible false. Okay, so we know that that's working fine. Now we need to go back to the enemies. And we need to hit trigger. We need to do a trigger once on here. System. Trigger once while true. So it doesn't do it multiple times over. Now, I think that that should be that. If I could. Yeah. Taking one away at a time. Are we still taking one away? Got 4 left. 3, 2, yeah, 1, and dead. Great, so we know that that works, that's fine. So the whip works, the other weapons work. I feel like we need the holy water particles to work on the boss as well. So let's copy that out and change wolf for boss. And then what we'll do is we'll just subtract 3, just manually subtract from HP 3. Yeah, I don't think we need the particles, although yeah, we'll get the boss to spawn them. On the objects layer. There, now that should be fine. Now the last thing we need to do on here is make it so that the player dies if we have less health than we should have. So let's go back to the player events. We can minimize all of these other groups. And we can come down here to the player hurt group. And we can just add in, in fact, we can just add in a condition here, a sub-event on the on hurt finished animation. Push B for a sub-event, and let's go and say system, and we've got the global variable controlling the player HP. So we're going to compare it. Player HP is less than or equal to 0. Let's copy that out and paste it in again and say greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0 after we finish the hurt animation, then we can go back to idle. Otherwise, we're going to change the state to dead, and we need to type in dead. And now we need to create what that state looks like. So minimize player hurt. We're going to go back up to states, and we can just copy out hurt, paste it again, and change this one to say dead. And then trigger once, set animation, and it will be set to dead, but we need to draw that in. So double click. Let's duplicate hurt, call it dead, and then what I'm going to do is I think we'll pop him down onto the floor there. I'm not going to spend too long with this one. We can duplicate this one. Pop his body down, kind of there. His backpack there. The head. There, we can just put him on a kind of an all fours on his hands and knees. but his eyes will be closed. In fact, his backpack will be, let's just get that. Oh. And then the last one, an easy way for dead is just make him look like a bit of a worm on the floor. Speed 6. And there he goes, collapsing down onto the floor. Although maybe keep it at speed 12 to be there. And he drops down to the floor. Right. Go back to player events, trigger once, change animation to dead, play from the beginning. Now, the last thing we need to do is make sure that we can't control any of the player actions if the player is in fact dead. So let's go back up to player control, and we can stick every single line of this inside a simple variable, check on a variable. So we're going to add an event to player controls. We're going to go system. We're going to compare the player HP, and if it's greater than 0, I'm going to drag this right to the top, right up there, and then everything is going to just be nested underneath that condition. So this will only work now if the player HP is greater than 0. So let's go back and get ourselves killed. And one more hit. And there we go. But the enemies can still hit us. So we need to put that same condition now on the enemies events. Let's go back to enemies. Although I think it might be a function where we take damage. Nope. Player hurt. Here we go. So we can just use that exact same condition. We can say system. We can compare the variable of the player HP and say if it's greater than 0, can drag it to the top, and then we can grab this and then just nest it. So now only this will work if that condition is true. So now we can get killed again. One more hit. And down we go, and now they just walk past us without even hurting us. We cannot control anything, and we are effectively dead. Now let's go back to layer 2 or layout 2. We're going to get rid of that, just drag it off screen so it's not visible, and let's give the game a play and see how it looks. Okay, everything's looking pretty good so far. I think there's one last thing we're going to need to do in regards to the boss. Okay, good. The last thing we're going to need to do with the boss is I want to just slow down the object's time scale when we hit it, so it goes into a bit of a slow motion, and I also want to show that the boss is taking damage. So let's go to the boss to start with, and let's add a behavior, and let's add in the flash behavior. Let's go back to enemies, and then let's go to enemies on collision with weapon, and let's say boss, and then let's just flash. And I'm also going to drag that up for when it collides with the hit trigger. We're also going to want to slow down the boss's timescale. So add an action, we're going to go boss, and we are going to set the object. We're going to go system, and we're going to come down to the bottom, and we're going to set object timescale. That object is going to be the boss, and the timescale is going to be 0.5, so it's half as fast. Then we're going to say system and wait 1 second, and then we're going to put the object's timescale back to 1. And what we could actually do is just stick that inside a quick function. So let's right click, add a function, call it boss slow-mo. Go back to enemies. We can cut that little bit of code that we put in there, put it into boss slow-mo. So set it to 0.5, wait 1 second, and then set it back. Come back into enemies, and let's just call that function right there, boss slow-mo. And let's also call that function right there. In fact, we can put it on last. And then that should slow the boss down when we hit it. Of course, we're going to have to hit it while it's moving. Yeah, but you can see it slowing down, but I think it needs to slow down for a little bit longer. And because it's flashing, in fact, let's get rid of the boss flashing, and then we'll be able to see it a little bit better. There you go, you can see that it's slowing down now when it gets hit. Yeah, that's nice. There you go. So when we've got it against the ropes, it gives us an opportunity to score multiple hits on it. Great, and there it is. And there's our boss battle done. In the next episode, we're going to add in some sounds, some sound effects. I'm going to show you how I source some of my sounds and sound effects. We're going to add in some music, so you can see how the music will change, transitioning from one level to the next level. So there'll be a boss soundtrack and a level 1 soundtrack. I'll show you how all of that works. So until then, thanks very much for sticking around if you've made it this far. And if you've got any suggestions for future tutorials, there is a channel in my Discord where I take suggestions.